giant orange records.
What can I say about these October finds? Well, I've slowed down a little bit, just a little bit from the previous month, which was insane. But I took to Discogs for the first few, and I watched prices of things in my want list for a really long time, maybe a little bit too long sometimes. That way you can really monitor what prices are, and then something might pop up that's a way better price than everything that's been on there for a long time. And that's when you gotta grab it, like this one. 3 o'clock Merriam-Webster Time. One side of the LP is by the Lemon Fog. The other side is by the Nomads. These were two psychedelic garage bands from Houston, Texas. They recorded in the late 60s. They both had a string of singles and 45s that did get released at that time. And they also have all of those collected here, or most of them, and a few outtakes that they recorded but never released. And this compilation was released on Orbit Records in 1982 or 83, something like that. And man, this is some killer stuff. And I'm wondering, like, this came out in the early 80s. What made them release this 60s music in the early 80s? Maybe the Cramps had something to do with it? I don't know. Or maybe the influence of the Cramps. Anyway, I highly recommend this one if you like 60s psychedelic garage. It's very kind of lo-fi, very sophisticated. The Nomads are a little bit more on the punk side. Lemon Fog is a little bit more, I don't know, on the folky side, if that makes sense. And in keeping with the Texas theme, Bobby Patterson was another new discovery for me. He recorded some soulful cuts, dance numbers, really in the late 60s. He was also from Texas, and this is a beautiful reissue on white vinyl. You can't see it because it's all packaged up. And you know, I really hate when they do that. I don't like the little glue strip on here because I've ripped many fine album covers with that because it gets so sticky, but it's a very nice pressing. He does a couple James Brown covers. It's kind of like a mix of Joe Tex and James Brown, that sort of thing. This particular pressing was released in 2020 on Modern Harmonic, and it was distributed by Sundazed. And if you know anything about Sundazed, pretty much everything they put out is awesome, and this is no exception. And I finally got an elusive Sundazed Mono 13th Floor Elevators reissue. This one came out in 2008 on Sundazed, and it's become quite an expensive reissue too. It's nowhere near what the originals would cost, but I was watching this for a long time on Discogs, and I finally found a copy for a pretty decent price, and I went for it. It sounds fabulous. It goes along with my 1978 Radar Records pressing from Greece. That's a stereo copy behind me. This is the mono copy. They both sound excellent. I haven't done a side-by-side comparison, but they sound really good to my ears. I've really been enjoying listening to this, and it was well worth the price of entry. And now, back to my favorite local record store, Sounds Good Music in Port St. Lucie. It's probably about the only good thing about Port St. Lucie. I mean, that might be a slight exaggeration, but this place rocks. Those guys have done a great job. This, an original 1966 Seeds album, the self-titled debut, one of their most fantastic albums. Really, this is essential rock and roll. It is top-tier garage rock. We get the little hype sticker, includes the hit Pushing Too Hard. Great song. It's on G&P Crescendo. I've been looking for this for a really long time. I can't believe that they sold it to me for this price. This is like a $100 album online, and I just paid a small fraction of that God, what a joy, what a treasure this is. If somebody asks you what's the definition of 60s garage rock, this is a prime example. Another one I've been looking for a very, very long time. David Bowie, Hunky, Dory. This is probably the nearest and dearest David Bowie album to me. This is a 1971 RCA pressing from the Hollywood pressing plant. Included is a lyric sheet here. And I love, love, love that David Bowie on Queen Bitch thanks the Velvet Underground. You know, he mentions VU, White Light, White Heat, returned with thanks. Fantastic album. Song for Bob Dylan, Andy Warhol, Life on Mars, Changes, Oh You Pretty Things, Kooks. So many great songs on here. Hunky Dory. It's hard to believe this came out in 1971. It's pretty early in Bowie's career. And it's not quite glam rock. It's pretty folky, and it's very English and very Bowie. Like, nobody sounds like Bowie. Another really interesting rockin' one from the early 70s, I think this came out in 1970 or so, is The Frost. Brr, good for November, right? Even in Florida, it gets a little chilly on some days. It's just called Rock and Roll Music. Some of this was recorded live. These guys look like they were having a pretty good time when that picture was taken. But yeah, it's just like, it's like power pop. It's kind of psychedelic. It's kind of fuzzy. It's kind of prog rock. It's kind of bluesy. It's all the things. I was just really impressed by this record, and they weren't going to sell it to me, but eventually they did. You know, like when you're getting into collecting things, whether it's, you know, vintage guitars or records or antiques or whatever, like, people will dangle things in front of you and be like, oh yeah, we're not ready to sell that yet, but it's mine now. Quite a treasure indeed. One of my goals is to collect as much Kinks on Pye as possible. I absolutely love the Kinks. They're probably one of my top favorite bands ever. And if you know me, that should be pretty obvious. This is Kinda Kinks. This is a UK mono reissue from 1980. It is on Pye Records, which is awesome. This is slightly different running order from the US version that I'm used to hearing, but still wonderful nonetheless. Has the original cover art. This would have been, I believe, their second album. And it's shocking at how good of a songwriter Ray Davies already is here. These are mostly originals on this album, whereas their first album had a lot of covers on it. Everybody needs to listen to more Kinks, especially the early Kinks, especially anything they did in the 60s. To me, that is just top tier rock and roll songwriting performance. It's punk before punk. It's beautiful, it's poetic, it is all the things that I love about rock and roll music. And to change gears a little bit, this is an album I'd never heard before. Kraftwerk, Autobahn. We're fahren auf der Autobahn, where you can drive as fast as you want. Of course, they have a Mercedes and a VW on the cover, probably the most German cars of all time. This record came out in 1974 on the famous Vertigo label. Very synthesizer driven, but it's like maybe if the Velvet Underground had more synthesizers and were German, if that makes sense. But they totally do their own thing. It's fascinating music. And I mean, look at these guys. They're a bunch of dorks. Like us, you know? I love that they have the lyrics on the back with the translation. So glad I got this. I was told by my buddy at the record store that this is an essential album, and I'm glad I listened because, yes, it definitely is an album that everybody should hear at least once in their life. This is probably the most record collector album of all time. Relatively Clean Rivers. It's their self-titled album. The only album this group ever made. This is a reissue from, I believe, 2022. I'm not sure if it's officially unofficial. It did come from a distributor, so I don't think it counts as a bootleg, but the originals of these go for like $2,000 because they're that rare and that collectible, and I guess somebody's willing to pay that much for it. But I'll say that this $20 reissue does the trick for me. It sounds pretty nice. It's folky, psychedelic rock. It's from 1976 originally. It sounds a little bit like the Grateful Dead, but I kind of like it more than most Grateful Dead albums. And please don't kill me for saying that. I mean, it's no American Beauty or anything. It's almost like worse than the Grateful Dead because it is so lo-fi. But there are moments on here that will really surprise me. It's kind of like if the Dead had a lot more fuzz guitars, and I love fuzz guitars. There's some like backwards guitars, some pretty like experimental stuff, and this is it's a fairly short album. It'll breeze right by in just a handful of minutes, but this is something that if you can find this at an affordable price, I think you will enjoy it. It's probably, one of those albums that probably almost anybody that's really into music could easily be into this. I think I learned about it from a Jeff Tweedy interview, and more on that later. This is the Rose Garden. They had a hit in the late 60s with a song called Next Plane to London. Really great folk rock album from about 1968 or so. I think they were a Los Angeles group. Kind of have a little bit of the Mamas and Papas and Birds kind of sound, but they're a little bit more garagey than that. A little bit, I don't know. I don't think the Wrecking Crew played on this album. I could be wrong. They do a really cool cover of Bob Dylan's She Belongs to Me. And there's a song that I really, really like here called Rider at the end of side 1. And apparently it's a traditional folk song. Anyway, that's a great little tune. February Sunshine, really, it's probably my favorite track on this album. I mean, the hit is really cool, but I really like the 12-string guitar. There's a lot of jingle jangle on here, and it's just really an overlooked album. I mean, it's not, I wouldn't put it above any Byrds record of the era or anything, but if you're into that sort of thing, it's pretty enjoyable. Good find. They set this aside for me because, they know, what kind of a nut job I am and kind of what my taste is for this kind of thing. If it's from the 60s, there's a good chance I'm probably going to like it. And that's why I want to jump to the 1980s next with the Feelies' third album called Only Life. I believe this is a promo copy. They were actually on A&M Records, which was apparently still putting out like kind of edgy indie rock in the late 80s. I think this record's from 1988 or so. One thing to note about the Feelies is their first album, some band called Weezer kind of ripped off the cover of their first album for Weezer's Blue album, where it's just the four of them standing on the bottom with a blue background. I don't have that album yet, but when I find it, I'll definitely pick it up. This reminds me a lot of Television, the band, Marquee Moon, that kind of stuff, but it has a lot of fuzz guitar. It's very like 60s influenced and very like 70s CBGB influenced, but with kind of longer songs. They're 4-5 minute songs here. Well written. This is kind of like, it's an important indie rock record from the 80s. So not that long ago, I saw the movie Love and Mercy for the first time. It's a biopic on Brian Wilson that focuses on two main eras. It's him during the creation of Pet Sounds and a little bit of Smile. And then it shows him in the 1980s, dealing with his crazy, manipulative psychologist and how his second wife kind of saved him from that. But the bits in that movie that shows Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys in the recording studio coming up with the parts on Pet Sounds, really, I found that to be really inspiring and well made. And it got me kind of listening to the Beach Boys again, because once upon a time I played in a group that sounded a lot like the Beach Boys, and I suffered from a little bit of overexposure to them. So I kind of resented that music a little bit, to no fault of the Beach Boys or Brian Wilson, who are greatly talented, genius level writers, producers, arrangers, everything. But I found a copy of Wild Honey from 1967. This came out after Smiley Smile. And again, it's them kind of playing in the sandbox. This is like the lo-fi Beach Boys. It's like, again, it's like the parents left the house to you for the weekend. The adults are gone, and we're just having fun. Like, it's definitely not as produced as the earlier Beach Boys records, but super fun. They do a great cover of Stevie Wonder's I Was Made to Love Her. Wild Honey is a really cool song. I think it has some theremin on it. And yeah, it's like soulful, surfy, lo-fi music. It's really cool. I'm glad I found this. Very, very short record. Goes by in a jiff. And another surprisingly enjoyable album is the Sam the Sham Revue by Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. This is probably the best Sam the Sham album that I've heard. I know the other albums might have bigger hits on it, but as an overall like work of an album, thematic piece, this one's really good. A lot of story songs. There's like chicken fight songs. There's a lot of like Spanish kind of influence songs. There's I don't know, some sort of creepy songs in the way that only Sam the Sham could do it, because there's some humor to it, like the Wanted Dead or Alive. Wow, fascinating. And all these songs are like 2 minutes long. This record goes by so fast. The Cockfight on side 2 is a standout track. Like, everybody should hear that song. It's not quite up there with their super big hits. It ain't no Woolly Bully, but it's a damn good song. And the first track, Black Sheep, really, really good stuff. Great song. And they leave us with a cover of Groovin', the Rascals hit, and actually like this version a lot more than the Rascals. It's definitely a lot more garage rock. And yeah, it's kind of reminds me a little bit of, there's so much organ on here, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Question Mark and the Mysterians. It's kind of in that ballpark. Groovy kind of dance songs. This is a little bit more out there and a little bit weird, like this really strange but enjoyable record. And speaking of out there, this band is called The Second Coming from 1970. Terrific album cover art. This is a white label promo copy, and pretty cool. It's like if Chicago had more fuzz guitars and was a lot more psychedelic, it would sound like this. I mean, this is a gatefold to reveal the full cover art from that to that. Whoa. I could just look at this cover for a pretty long time. I like the inside of the gatefold too. Like, these are some pretty groovy cats, you know? Like, I would hang out with these people. They, some of them seem to have put pictures of their children on there, which is kind of a hippie thing, you know? Is that super professional? I don't know. Are the kids part of the band? I don't know. But they have several songwriters in this band, and as you can see, it's a relatively large group. If you're going to have a horn section in your rock band, There's going to be a lot of people in that band. Again, I would listen to this over Chicago pretty much any day. It's groovy, it's weird, there's killer instrumentals, the playing, so good. Another record I've been looking for a fairly long time, this is a jazz record, Forest Flower by Charles Lloyd at Monterey on Atlantic Records. Man, this is just, jazz is kind of hard to describe, but you could probably put this into like Jazz 101 records, because it is so enjoyable. I love seeing like the film strip. So this record was recorded at the Monterey Jazz Festival in September of 1966. The record was released in 1967. Didn't I tell you we were going to get back to Wilco later? Well, I found Sky Blue Sky, their album from 2006-2007. It's really the first one to feature guitarist Nels Cline, who is just a virtuoso guitarist, noisemaker, sound maker. Nobody plays like Nels Cline. I mean, he's his own category of style playing. Comes with a little lyric sheet. Of course, it's 2 LPs because it's a fairly long record, like most Wilco albums. They just kind of go on for a pretty long time. This was one, when it came out, I really didn't care for it, but over time I've grown to appreciate this as another great Wilco album, Sky Blue Sky. Not much to say about it, just you gotta listen to it. Then got a couple honorable mentions here. This is a group called Group Therapy. People Get Ready, which they cover, but the album is called People Get Ready for Group Therapy. Psychedelic garage rock, mostly covers. I believe this came out in 1967 or so. Still kind of on the fence about this one. I may be passing this one back on. Probably give it one more listen. But a lot of covers. They covered Foxy Lady by Hendrix. They covered Come See About Me, which has some really killer fuzz guitar work on it. That is a really cool cover of a Motown song. Probably my favorite moment on this record. The rest of the record is kind of hit and miss for me. I don't know if it's strong enough from a holistic point of view to hang on to this one, but it is an interesting artifact. Love their outfits. Love the artwork on the album. And talk about psychedelic albums from the 60s. The Crome Syrcus, and of course Circus is spelled Syrcus because it's psychedelic, man. Love Cycle, spelled normally. Very far out, trippy cover. Cool to keep it for the artwork. This is on the Command label, who I've never really heard of. There's a long bit of some dude reading his poetry on one side of this. There's some other stuff that's kind of okay on here. I haven't really given this the proper time of day yet, but I will say the artwork is quite colorful and pretty fantastic. Also, a gatefold, very 1960s looking. So yeah, the verdict is still not quite back on this one, but we shall see. And of course, another Rhinoceros album. I haven't listened to this one yet, but it's on the Elektra label. I kind of enjoyed the other Rhinoceros album that I featured in the September Finds video. So we'll see. Again, another fantastic album cover. I mean, what were these guys thinking when they said, this will make an awesome album cover? Hey, it's art. I get it. It's a cool thing about art. And that's it for this one. Probably be taking a little break from these monthly updates, as I forgot that I've got my 6-month car payment that I just had to pay, and I took my dog to the vet today. It was quite a hefty bill, but he seems to be doing okay. He doesn't like wearing the cone, or as I call it, the doggy hat. But one trip to the vet equals several trips to the record store. So I'll just leave it at that, and happy listening. I've got quite a stack of records to get through anyway, so I'll be busy listening.